Welcome to This Week in BJJ, the world's first and only live jiu-jitsu show. Brought to you by Defense Soap. Defend what you have built. And Q5 Labs. Stay Alpha. And here's your host, Budo Jake.
Hey guys, welcome to a new episode of This Week in BJJ. Today we have a great interview and techniques by the one and only Roy Dean. But before we get to that, I'd like to ask you one favor. If you've purchased any of our products, I'd like to ask you to write an honest review. Whether you've purchased them on BudoVideos.com, on Amazon, on iTunes, or on the Google Play Store, if you can leave an honest review giving your feedback, that'll help us attract more customers, and our products will show up a little higher in the rankings. The more customers we get, the more products we can make, the more instructionals we can make, the more episodes of Rolled Up and This Week in BJJ we can produce. So if you can help me out with that, I'd really appreciate it. Now let's get to the interview with Roy Dean. One nice thing about wrist locks is when you get good at it, it's going to make guys really hesitant to grip. So that's a really good tool. When someone is not confident in gripping you, that's going to make you much more effective on your sweeps and all the rest of your jiu-jitsu. So his hips are controlled, his elbows locked in place. Now all I need to do is apply the wrist lock. Hey guys, welcome back. I'm very happy to have Roy Dean here. Roy, I've known you for a long time, but only online. It's great to have you here in the flesh.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you, Jake.
For those of you who might not know, Roy is a black belt in Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, and Judo. So pretty nice pedigree there. And Roy, I'm curious, where did your interest in martial arts begin? Because when I think about where my initial interest began, I can't pinpoint that moment. Was there a particular moment, was it maybe a movie or something that you saw that really got you into martial arts?
Well, definitely there were a couple of movies that I think affect a lot of people of our generation. Certainly The Karate Kid and even seeing Steven Seagal movies like Above the Law. But it was more of an experience of going to Japan as an exchange student. They encouraged me to study Judo. It's very similar to like a wrestling program, high school wrestling program. So I studied Judo in Japan, and that was what really got me into the martial arts. And once you start, it's difficult to stop.
That's right. And, the more I got to know you, I realized that we really have a lot in common, of course, with experience in Aikido and Jiu-Jitsu and the living in Japan thing, too. Mm-hmm. How long were you in Japan?
For 1 year, from the age of 16 to 17.
Was that enough? Were you ready to go back home after that?
I was ready to go back after that. I certainly made some really good friends, and I love the Japanese culture. I have an affinity to Japanese culture, all things Japanese. But, when you're a teenager, you miss your friends, you miss your family, and being in a foreign land was a little disorienting. But I'm very grateful for that opportunity to be able to experience that culture. Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of things to talk about, from your academy, your instructionals, and Aikido, Judo, and Jiu-Jitsu. So let's get right into it. Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, and Judo. Of course, they all have the similar root of Jiu-Jitsu. But what do you see as the thread that connects all of them?
This actually comes from my Japanese Jiu-Jitsu training. Jiu-Jitsu is distraction, angles, and leverage. And of course, different arts have different rule sets and different planes where they operate. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is more on the horizontal plane. Japanese Jiu-Jitsu is more on the vertical plane. But ultimately, it's distraction, angles, and leverage. And in more traditional forms of Jiu-Jitsu, like Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, they might use a strike or a pressure point to take your mind for a moment. Whereas in BJJ, they don't have any strikes, or Judo. So they take your mind through another attack. And I think being able to just understand the principles allows you to go seamlessly from art to art and appreciate each one for what it is, because each have their own strength. And it's nice to be well-rounded. Right.
Most of the BJJ students out there got their jiu-jitsu through this guy. Mm-hmm. Through Maeda. Maeda was the guy who went from Japan and taught Carlos Gracie originally, which was basically judo at that point. But there's a whole world of traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu out there that maybe Maeda didn't really learn. He was mostly a Kodokan judo guy. And I know you are a martial arts nerd like myself. Have you found anything in the wider spectrum of Japanese jiu-jitsu that you've got something out of?
Definitely. There's an art that I trained extensively. I was actually an uchideshi in this art of Seibukan Jiu-Jitsu. It's based out of Monterey, California. Julio Toribio was the founder of that art, and he was the fourth American to receive the Menkyo Kaiden Shihan in Hakuryu Jiu-Jitsu. Now, Hakuryu Jiu-Jitsu it's very static. It's all kata, but it's extremely painful, and they certainly know how to get your attention. So, he kind of did his own offshoot with Hakuryu as a base, and I found that to be, a nice mix of bridging maybe the Aiki arts to traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, and there's a spontaneity in that art that I find really inspiring. Now, I've had friends along the way that have left that path and went back to the original Hakuryu, and there is some very amazing technique in those traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu circles. There's a gentleman named Ivo Bellmans that I was exposed to. He's out of Belgium. Truly one of the finest martial artists I've ever come across, and his technique was so clean. Even though it wasn't BJJ, it was a different thing, I definitely have respect for his level of technique, and it's very inspiring.
Right. Roy, you and I both studied Aikido for a long time, and I'm sure you get this question like I do. How does Aikido work with Jiu-Jitsu? Is there anything that's useful in the two? And I always tell people that it's not really technique for technique. Aikido techniques don't work in a Jiu-Jitsu sparring context as much as as Aikido people would expect. But there are some underlying principles that really carry over. Instead of me answering the question, what are some of the concepts or principles that you find that you learned in your Aikido that works in BJJ?
It's all about blending. It is a strength to be able to continue to move forward and be able to impose your will on somebody. And there are times where you have to do that. That actually is the path of least resistance, holding your ground and going forward. But reverse is a very useful gear, and to be able to back up, to recognize, to be able to discern when you're going to be overpowered, and to be able to blend with that and then redirect. It takes sensitivity, it takes skill, it takes time, but that kind of sensitivity and timing, those are things that you can increase. Your power will decrease over time, but your sensitivity and timing can increase if trained properly. And so I think that Aikido, in that sense, is an amazing tool for developing sensitivity and timing.
Yeah. In Aikido, they're always talking about sensitivity and timing. But if you take an average Aikido student and put them on the ground into a sparring context, they're going to have a very hard time. Suddenly that timing and sensitivity that they had been developing standing up suddenly is gone in a sparring context on the ground. But I think the focus on all that makes them a little more in tune to that, and I think you can pick up on it later, because if you've only studied jiu-jitsu, most jiu-jitsu instructors don't talk about things like sensitivity. And I don't know if you've found that experience. Have you experienced that as well?
Yeah, I'm fortunate in that my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor, Roy Harris, is very attuned to that and how to adapt as a martial artist as you age, what can be improved, what should be recognized but not focused on. He's a very analytical man, a very special teacher. I'm proud to have him as my
And Roy
BJJ.
studied a lot of different arts.
He is not your average bear. That is for sure. He's, it's funny. As a young martial artist, you might have that conversation with yourself about, could I take my teacher? Would I be able to, beat this person? Well, I'm a better striker, but he's better on the ground, that kind of a thing. All that is so moot with Mr. Harris. You can do knives, machetes, guns, striking, grappling, street fighting. I've never tapped him in my entire life. I've never legitimately tapped him. He's a true master.
Right. Another thing that we need to talk about, Roy, is this subject of breathing. That's something that I know our backgrounds in Aikido is a little bit different schools, but breathing is something that I focused a lot on. And in Jiu-Jitsu, that's something that's not talked about very much. But I found that in a lot of my sparring sessions, regardless of the rank of the person I might be sparring with, they'll often be breathing really heavily. And they're probably overexerting, but also they're just not aware of how to control their breath. How has your experience been in that regard? Have you studied much of breathing in your training?
A bit in Aikido, but over the last 5-6 years, I've really gotten into Ashtanga yoga and the emphasis on breathing and kind of getting out of the way of your breath. Let the breath lead the movement, and being able to synchronize your movements with your breath. That's really heavily emphasized, and I have learned a lot about breathing from that, and just the mental state that kind of regulated breathing can lead you into. There's an equanimity of mind with Ashtanga. When you leave the session, you just feel very even. And, when you are new to a sport or an art like BJJ, everything looks like a threat. So you're on guard. You're moving suddenly. You don't know how to regulate your breathing, and you're unconsciously responding. And I think, as you advance, as you get up there, you recognize what the possible threats are from any given position, and you're able to really just calm it down and only breathe explosively when you need to. And the rest of the time, it's just much more chill.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. A beginner is going to have a hard time properly breathing in anything. But as you get more experience, that you calm down a bit. Yeah. So you mentioned yoga. What are you finding yoga provides that Jiu-Jitsu didn't?
There's quite a bit. Okay. Number one, if in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you tend to have, number one, an asymmetrical game. So you tend to favor one side, you turn to one side more, you pass to one side more. Ashtanga is very symmetrical. Maybe some viewers are familiar with Bikram yoga, kind of the hot yoga, where you do a set series of postures every time.
Never changes.
Never changes. Ashtanga is similar. They have 5 levels. I'm still working away on level 1. And there's something about the symmetry of left, right, that alerts you to where you may be a little bit off in your back, where you may be overdeveloped in some areas, and it helps you kind of alert you to, how you're holding your shoulders. Just think about the guard. People are like this all the time, and you're rewarded for being able to adopt that like closed clamshell posture in BJJ. But Ashtanga gives you the opportunity to do back bends, to open up, to really celebrate the sprawl, and just be able to invert your spine. And there's something about that is, it's good for your brain, it's good for your body, and it just keeps you even and young. And the secret of youth is a soft and flexible spine. And Ashtanga is really a healing art, in my opinion.
Roy, what's something that you've learned recently that you wish you would have learned a long time ago? Or in other words, some advice you would have given yourself at the beginning of your journey?
There's something to be said about the competitive nature of athletes. And especially in BJJ, you come in with a group of guys, a generation. And then, you're climbing the ladder. People will drop out. But you're kind of ascending with a group. And then if you get injured, you don't want to stop because those people are climbing too. And maybe you were dominant, and now they're going to be dominant. And that's a very difficult thing for people to – you have to think more long term. That's a difficult thing for people to swallow. And for me personally, I've had a number of injuries over the years that I probably should have recovered from a little bit more. I didn't have a lot of money in San Diego. I was a poor student. My back would get jacked up. My neck would hurt. I would see a chiropractor. But then I didn't have the resources to invest in healing like I should have. And maybe I should have investigated more modalities that allowed for self-healing like Ashtanga. I always had an affinity toward yoga, but I never really found that path that resonated. So patience with yourself, patience with healing. Don't train over the injuries. They'll resurface in time. So just think long term and don't get too anxious if people are passing you up. That's the way it is.
Yeah, it's good advice, and it's a hard thing to do when you're injured. It's a hard thing to stay off the mats, at least for me and most jiu-jitsu addicts that I know. That's where you want to be. So, Roy, you strike me as a person who has a lot of goals, and you're very successful in reaching those goals. You've done a lot of things in terms of your career, of studying all the different martial arts, of opening up your own academy, of doing a lot of instructionals. What is your goal now?
I've had some really amazing changes in my life, things I've looked forward to for a couple of years, but the timing wasn't right. So now I'm shifting my focus away from having a physical academy, which I did for 8 years, and now I'm focusing more on my affiliates. I have a number of projects. I have a book project and a movie project that I'm working on. But the majority of my energy is going to go into my affiliates and creating resources for them. I currently have 11 affiliates, and to be able to, they were attracted to the vision that I brought to Jiu-Jitsu. You know, discover who you are. It's a path of self-discovery. And people say Jiu-Jitsu can't change the world. It does change the world. It changes lives in a very profound way. And for my affiliates to be able to bring that to their home community, the same energy that I had in my gym, I've done that. Now I want to help them bring that to their own home communities even more effectively. And then also there's something about passing on, creating environments where the art can be passed on in the right way. I'm all about the middle ground. Yes, you can do MMA. Yes, you can do self-defense jiu-jitsu. You can do competition jiu-jitsu. I want to create environments and help others create environments where you can go in any of those directions. The technique is so strong and people are so grounded. And the community itself is so well represented from all age ranges. That's what really makes a community. It's not just about strong 20-something-year-old guys battling it out. That's a very unique time, and believe me, if there was a jiu-jitsu scene that exists now, back then, 20 years ago, I would have been right there. But different time, different era, and I think that the true transformational power of the art is in extending jiu-jitsu to everybody and creating the right kind of environment where it can be passed on properly.
That just opened up so many different questions, Roy. But first of all, you mentioned you have 11 affiliates. Where are they located?
I have a number in the United States, California, South Carolina, Oklahoma. I also have one in Moscow and another one in South Africa. And one of my students, Neil Thompson, he just went out and spent 3 weeks in South Africa, sharing his skills with them and boosting the level of the academy, and everybody was really excited, and he really enjoyed the experience. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you can't predict when you get into jiu-jitsu. And if you have that goal of like, I want to travel the world, and the journey's just too long, but if you just chip away at it, these things open up and you meet the most amazing people. You end up on the most amazing shows, and you end up just in situations. It's not about money. It's about shared intent and vision.
Okay. So say there's a guy that has a jiu-jitsu school in the middle of nowhere, and he wants to affiliate with somebody. Why should he choose the Roy Dean affiliation?
Well, it depends on, number one, if he's attracted to my particular vision. If he's not, if he wants to be more heavily sport-oriented, or if he wants more traditional Gracie Jiu-Jitsu self-defense, then he should seek another affiliation. But there's an inspiring tone that I try to strike in all my videos. And if he resonates with that, that's number one. Number two, I always test how serious they are. And then we have a face-to-face meeting. And if it's more about vibe and whether or not I resonate with them and they resonate with me. It's about finding we're creating an international network of like-minded martial artists. And of course I have a lot of resources available for them, media resources. I have my white to black, all my instructionals. I recently redid my website. I'm creating a gallery where affiliates can download. I have my good friend Rick Ellis has taken some amazing images, and they're used all over the web right now. But, for example, if an affiliate wants to have any of those pictures blown up on their wall, to take the flavor of the home academy into their own environment. All those things are available. Answer base. The thing is, I did it, and I didn't know anything when I started. All I knew that I was good at jiu-jitsu. And when I was in San Diego, I started attracting people to me. I didn't know how to run a business, but I did all that hard work. All the hard work, made the mistakes, paid the price in some instances, and was able to legitimately affect a lot of people's lives, both locally and on a broader basis through the media. And there's nothing quite like experience, and I liken it to my competition experience. I was able to win some competitions coming up through the ranks, but I competed more because the best guys were competing, and I wanted to be like them. I wanted that skill level. It wasn't about the gold medal. It was about achieving a higher level of skill. And so you do the work it takes. You have the success. Now you know what it takes to lead others up that path. And I feel it's very similar with the affiliation. I've done that. I made a lot of sacrifices to craft a very specific vision for my academy. And now that I've done that, I have the lessons, and now I can pass on those lessons. And my energy is not so much on individual practitioners. It's much more about teacher to teacher.
Right. Yeah, and I noticed just from watching your videos, you're a fantastically talented teacher, and you have a unique way of testing. Can you talk a little bit about your testing process and how you go about holding tests?
Yeah, so what people see when they see a belt demonstration is a bit of a test. Usually almost always the person is cleared. I give them the option of doing a test of skill or a demonstration of skill, or just receiving the belt. Mm. And I've had people in law enforcement, they're like, yeah, I really don't want my video up, so I'll just present the belt to them. On the other hand, most want to show and share their skills with others. It's not about making an awesome video for YouTube. It's more about sharing it with the people that they sweat with on the mat, with that local mat community, as well as their loved ones. There was an experience I had that really sent me in that direction of exploring demonstrations. And I believe my instructor, Roy Harris, was getting his third-degree black belt from Joe Moreira. And a number of students drove out there and presented to him. And then Joe presented a black belt to, I'm not even sure who this gentleman was, but his wife and his daughter were there. And he came up, shook hands, gave him the black belt, picture, boom. I was like, wow, that was probably 8 to 12 years of work encapsulated in about maybe 40 seconds. Mm. And I said, everybody deserves their day. You deserve your day, your moment. And there's something about putting a lot of energy into one moment, say like an hour-long belt demonstration, where you have to demonstrate positional escapes, a number of techniques, technique combinations, and then spar. So it's not about physical repetition of technique. It's about showing what you've drilled to sharpen your game, and then putting it into action. And so those can be very transformational experiences. People rarely get physically tested after like high school or college. Mm. I mean, when are you ever really under duress? Maybe in a CrossFit workout. But aside from that, to have an experience that you can invite friends and family to, where you're going to be safe, it's different than a competition. A competition is much more intense and much shorter. It's much more compressed. Here, I elongate that experience, and pace it out. So you are pushed to your envelope, and it takes definitely a certain sensitivity from the instructor to be able to bring that person just a little bit beyond themselves. Mm-hmm. But they love it, and the students love the process. They can feel how much better, more fluid their game becomes, how much sharper they can get that knife because of the process of preparing for that demonstration.
Yeah, I think it's a great service that you provide to the students, and one that probably larger schools couldn't offer. It takes a lot of time for you to do that.
Absolutely. And so I had a very boutique academy. And it was always like a small to medium-sized school, and I was able to put a lot of energy into those specific students, and then broadcast that on online. Now that's a different era. So that was, I'm not going to do any more belt demonstrations.
How about will your affiliates do it?
We can do it in their home environment, and they've already begun. They're filming their own. You know, I have a set of songs that I composed that are it's available online, and they can use any of those songs to be able to score these demonstrations. So now it's moved away from me. I've shown them the model. Now they're bringing it to their environment, and they're excited about it. And I'm impressed. Some of the affiliate demonstrations that I've seen, I'm like, the art is evolving.
Right. Yeah, that's a nice thing. If I can think of one thing that you're really known for, it's those demonstration tests. Mm-hmm. It's a really cool thing. So you mentioned your boutique academy that you had, and it was a beautiful academy. It still exists, of course, but you did a fantastic job of decorating that place. But recently, you something happened there, mm-hmm. and what happened?
I had a collaborative effort with a young filmmaker named Stuart Cooper. He came into town. I hosted him, and unfortunately, we weren't able to align visions. He completed his documentary on me, but we just had different views of the situation. And unfortunately, it didn't work out, but I certainly wish Stuart the best. He's very talented. And I think he's going to go on to do great things and continue to share the art through his unique lens, and I'm going to do the same through mine.
Mm-hmm. So what was the main reason for you to give up that amazing academy you had, and will you be teaching in any fixed location from here on out?
So I will continue to be in Bend for the next, definitely through the summer. Summertime in Bend is pretty amazing. I'm not tied to Bend because I just have so many different options in terms of location. I always knew I've been called the classic creative personality type, where I focus on a project for a while and I do it, and then I feel a need to move on. And so I feel like this is the next level in my evolution as a teacher. So you have to go through the black belt process, right? White belt, blue belt, all the way up to black belt. Then you become a teacher. I did that. I awarded my first black belt to a very talented gentleman named Donald Bowerman. Got my third degree. Now it's all about teachers. Now it's about sharing my skills and experience and becoming a teacher's teacher, just like my instructor. He's an amazing man, a good coach, but really he's an instructor's instructor. And I feel like that's the next step in my evolution.
So you mentioned that you competed a little bit coming up through the ranks.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you haven't competed recently, but if somebody came to you and offered you a super fight, would that be something you would be interested in?
There's very few things that really pique my interest. There has been talk floated. Some people got excited about me possibly matching up with Nick Grigoriadis. He has kind of a holistic approach to jiu-jitsu, as do I, and so that would be, while neither of us are top competitors, it would still be, I think it could be a beautiful match in an esteemed location such as Metamoris. And then people have mentioned over the years a rematch with Nick Diaz. We battled as blue belts in the U.S. Open. He ended up winning on points, and I think that would be interesting. But very few things actually pique my interest to get me to, You got to train, man. You have to train. And a lot of people that like jiu-jitsu as entertainment but don't compete themselves don't fully understand the level of dedication. And that's another reason why I really went toward teaching. I understood the level of dedication it took to compete and do well at that level. And it's more than people think. So much more than people think. So those are two possible, but very little. There was also the idea of maybe going back to Japan and doing a super fight. That's where I started training originally with judo, and I think there would be something very holistic and full circle about doing a match like that.
Right. So, Roy, I ask you a few quick little questions. First one is, if you could change one thing about jiu-jitsu as a whole, what would you change?
I think people simply don't accept other styles of jiu-jitsu within jiu-jitsu. You know, there's a bias. Okay, there's a grudging respect to judo. But BJJ guys, really, they're not into Aikido. They're not into Japanese jiu-jitsu. They're not into, and certainly those arts aren't as dynamic, and the litmus test of full resistance isn't implemented on every day. And once you become, I call it becoming a meat eater. Once you become a meat eater, it's just hard to go back sometimes. But don't fully discount it, because, I mean, really, I would much rather have an idea of how to get off the line if confronted with a knife or a gun with Aikido training or Japanese Jiu-Jitsu training than any kind of sport-oriented BJJ training. Right. And, you know, that's where it starts. That's where it starts. So just having a more open mind as to what those angles are and their methods of distraction. It's not all about, okay, you go for a choke and they put their arm up and then you go for the arm bar. That's a well-known distraction. But you can also manipulate people through your words. You can get them distracted. They're following your words, and then you go into a strike, you go into an attack, a disarm. There's a lot more ways than people think. And when you create boundaries with competition, it's good. You can exert yourself as much as possible within those boundaries, and you have to go deep to be able to continue to win. The evolution continues in a downward manner. But then, man, if you could just broaden that base a little bit with other skills, I think it's going to create the next Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. That's where it's at. I mean, people are like, traditional martial arts, TMA. Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is a TMA. Mm-hmm. And there are other things. MMA is really a TMA. It's just now it's codified as a full sport. I mean, especially with the Reebok deal and the uniforms, and it's fully evolved into a sport, very different than the Vale Tudo roots.
Yeah. If you are a jiu-jitsu guy wanting to practice stand-up, would you recommend judo or wrestling?
Wrestling. I wish I wrestled. I did judo. I have a black belt in judo, but it's difficult, the timing of it. If you get out of that loop, certain throws are ingrained in my neuromuscular memory, but really it's you have to have the kazushi, you have to have the timing, that uninterrupted motion. It's difficult. And now with further restrictions that they have, that the Judo Federation has set up on grabbing legs, I really think judo is beautiful. Beautiful to watch, incredibly dynamic, very elegant. I love the way it's celebrated internationally. And judo athletes are very, very tough and in great shape. Yeah. But I personally would do wrestling. I like wrestling a lot more, better Noogie. And there was a lot more judo influence in BJJ when it first came to America. But then once the Americans started, injecting that wrestling influence, it changed it.
Yeah, that's for sure. So speaking of no-gi, what do you see as the perfect balance of gi versus no-gi training?
I would say majority gi training, just because you can extend people out. You can see, you can visualize and feel those angles a little bit more. And then I would say like once a week to twice a week no-gi training. I think it's important to do both. You don't want to be completely Ghee reliant. On the other hand, people massively underestimate how they can be manipulated through their clothing, just walking around in everyday life. So, as long as people are wearing clothes, I think the kimono definitely has a place.
Right. We were talking about competition earlier. How much do you emphasize competition among your students? Because some people love it, some people hate it, but sometimes the people that hate it are the ones that need it the most.
Good point. So I don't emphasize competition. Usually if a flyer was sent to the academy, I'd be like, hey, if anybody wants to. But I kind of know who the competition guys were. And I had some students that did very well in competition, starting with the girls. Like the women at my academy really excelled, and they just in my method of instruction that linked one technique to another to create fluency, it just resonated really well with the ladies. So they always did well in competition. Additionally, I have a few people, Byron Higginbotham and Donald Bowerman. Those are probably my two top competitors. Both won Gracie Worlds. One is a purple, one is a brown. And they've won other competitions as well, U.S. Open. Those, I'm proud of them for doing that, but it's just part of it. It's just part of it. So, again, middle path. If they want to do that, I support them, and I have the experience to be able to select the right competitions for them. Basically, approve like, okay, that's one you should definitely work towards. But it's not for everybody. And it can be detrimental. The competitions can be detrimental. They can actually sour you on jiu-jitsu. They're more expensive than they've ever been. There's more emphasis put on them than ever before. So they train for a while, they train really hard, maybe they sustain an injury in training, they spend a lot of money on a plane ticket, hotel, they go out there, and maybe they win, but the referee blows a decision, and then they're like, what was that? That was thousands of dollars and about 3 months. What's going on here? Right. So it's not for everybody, but that gives the art teeth, and it keeps people sharp and realistic, and we shouldn't ever do away with competition.
I agree with that. Competition can be bad for some people, but amazing transforming experiences for others. And I agree with you that a middle path is best, and not everybody should be forced to compete. But what's your take on the instructor? Because you have the experience of competing. You can help guide the students that want to compete. But if there's a teacher out there who's never competed before, how can he effectively guide his students to competition?
True that, man. There's no disagreement at all, because my instructor competed a number of times, but the day I told him, I remember I competed in this Chris Brennan West Side Submission tournament, and I fought like 8 times, and it was just brutal. Guys are brutal. Like, this guy was going for a one-arm guillotine, but he ripped my throat, so I couldn't swallow well for a couple days, and I got slammed a few times, and I thought, okay, I paid for that. And I went to him in a private lesson. I was like, I don't know about competing anymore. I'm not really feeling it. And he was like, oh, I've been waiting for you to say that, which was exactly the opposite of what I thought he might say, or what a typical instructor might say if they heavily emphasize competition. But when it comes to competition, if you encourage your students, you really should have done it. And you don't always have, a leader leads from the front. And a lot of people think, well, you need to be competing still as a teacher. Well, maybe that's where your energy is best spent, and maybe not. There's more than one way to lead, but a leader should have walked that path. That's what a sensei is.
Right. So in your demonstration tests, a student is required to show a certain number of sweeps and guard passes and submissions. Do you think when you get your black belt, you should be required to have at least competed once?
I've only graduated 1 black belt. Everyone else in the running has competed. I can see that. I can see that being. On the other hand, sometimes age can be a factor. There are people receiving their black belts in their 70s. Late 60s and 70s, and do you want to do that? I mean, how many guys could they possibly... You'd really have to orchestrate something special for that to happen, the octogenarian division or whatever. So being able to have that, and maybe they bump those guys down a few, so he's facing somebody in their 50s. If there's an opportunity for them to have an even match, and it's more about creating a positive experience, then certainly somebody in their 60s can still compete. Not necessary, but I think it's a strong indicator of being able to be a good teacher going forward.
I can agree with that. Roy, let's talk about the Jiu-Jitsu lifestyle. What does that mean to you?
I think it's the Jiu-Jitsu lifestyle is being able to apply Jiu-Jitsu off the mat. And it's knowing when there are overwhelming forces that you shouldn't oppose, that you should just blend with. Pick your battles, pick your spot. Even when you're down, even when you're mounted, a single turn can completely change the situation. And just being able to transfer those lessons that we get on the mat into daily life, particularly verbally, verbal confrontations that people have. Sometimes if you feel passionately about something, you oppose somebody directly, and maybe that's not the right way. Maybe stepping aside and letting them go by is better in some circumstances, at least until maybe the third go around, and then they've slowed down. There's enough wind taken out of their sails so you can have something a little bit more constructive. I definitely feel it's application of Jiu-Jitsu principles and concepts off the mat. And yes, there's dietary things, and Jiu-Jitsu lifestyle also encompasses the connection you make with other people and having an organic fellowship of men and women that you can be with, that you trust, because honestly, that is probably the most true conversation. The physical conversation you have on the mat sparring with somebody reveals so much more about their personality than words. And being able to relate to people and have that kind of tactile stimulation, it just makes us more human. It celebrates our humanity and puts it in a very elegant format that we can experience over and over again. Then as you get really skilled, you're able to share and introduce that experience to other people and get a few smiles along the way. It's one reason I chose to dedicate my life to this art, and I hope more people can experience it going forward. The growth of Jiu-Jitsu is phenomenal. I'm really impressed with the work that everybody's done. Every organization, every school, to get it to kind of the global stage. And now that we're here, it's about shepherding it properly.
Yeah, because there are little signs that come up every once in a while to show you how much it's growing. And the latest one is just yesterday, the final numbers for the IBJJF Europeans tournament has come out. 3,400 competitors. That makes it the largest jiu-jitsu tournament ever.
That is, yes. And it's not, and we're not at the peak yet.
No.
We're not at the peak. It's good. I'm glad it's captured the imagination. I mean, when I started, nobody knew what Jiu-Jitsu was. Judo was something that wrestlers did in the off season, maybe, if it was available. And, just people learning that there's a different way. There's a different way, a gentle way, right, a technical way to approach fighting and to approach life. I think it allows you to leverage. It allows people to leverage all of their abilities, and we all benefit from it.
Yeah, and one thing that I like, that since Jiu-Jitsu has grown so much, there's so many different affiliations, and they all have their own flavors. It's almost like, I was talking to Eddie Bravo the other day, it's almost like Kung Fu schools, how each one has their specialty. And not only specialties, but the different, I'm going to use that word again, flavors. Like your school is very smooth, whereas maybe a Carlson Gracie school is a little more stronger, strength-based. And that's not saying one is better than the other, but each one can appeal to a different personality type.
Absolutely. And some people might look at that as splintering. I think it's just more options.
Yep,
yeah.
Absolutely. And when some people look towards the further growth of Jiu-Jitsu, what a lot of people imagine is the Olympics. They think once Jiu-Jitsu gets to the Olympics, then it's going to be huge and everybody's going to be making money and everything's going to be great. Do you share that dream?
Careful what you ask for. Judo definitely has morphed considerably from its introduction into the Olympics, and they want to make it more spectator friendly. They want to make it this. They want to make it that. It wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but being able to make it an Olympic sport, make it very, very point-oriented. Like when I trained judo, in Japan they did a touch of newaza. Back in the U.S., nothing. Almost nothing.
Just turtle up and wait for the...
Yeah. And recently had a national judo competitor come and train at the academy, and he joined up. And, it's different habits. And some of those are applicable for, self-defense, and some of them aren't. And rules dictate behavior. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think that the more traditional styles of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, or what's taught by the Valente brothers, that will actually gain more credence if BJJ goes into the Olympics, because it's going to get more specialized, more point-oriented, and it's all about that gold medal.
Right. You mentioned making Jiu-Jitsu more viewer-friendly. Mm-hmm. And I get this question a lot. Since we do the majority of the live broadcasts out there for tournaments, people are always asking me, how do we make it more user-friendly? How do we tap into the casual fan? Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure Jiu-Jitsu can be made fun for somebody who doesn't train at all. I don't know if you've ever tried to get somebody, a friend or a relative, to watch a Jiu-Jitsu match that doesn't train. Usually it's hard. It's very hard. But if you know what's going on, if you're a longtime competitor or practitioner, you see the small details and you can appreciate it. Mm. Do you think it's possible that Jiu-Jitsu will ever have casual fans?
Yes, but it's not about changing the behavior of the participants by the rules. It's about educating the audience more. And so I think as we get globally educated on the art, the nuance, people know what an armbar is. Jujigatame, that 20 years ago, nobody knew what Jujigatame was. But whether it's an armbar or a guard pass and kind of the more exotic positions, it can be, a little bit boring. It can be a little bit boring, even to people that are more experienced in viewing it. But I don't think we should change that. I think you should, not everybody likes really good wine. Not everybody has an educated palate. Not everybody is capable of the sensitivity. But that's just where they're at. It doesn't mean we need to don't pollute the wine. Right. Just get a deeper appreciation through education.
Yeah. So the biggest groups that are trying to make Jiu-Jitsu more user-friendly, viewer-friendly, is events like Metamoris and Polaris, these kind of super fight events. Do you enjoy watching those?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And even if it doesn't end in a submission, the Yuri Samoa's Keenan Cornelius match, the last one, fantastic. Yeah. So aggressive, so technical. And so what if it doesn't end in a submission? There's so much good stuff. It doesn't matter. And Gary Tonin, dude, I'm a fan. That guy is good. Fluid, balletic almost. Really, just everything that's right with jiu-jitsu. And risk taking. And you have to take risk in this life. And sometimes I see parallels between entrepreneurship and jiu-jitsu. Don't make It's all about risk management, making an intelligent choice, knowing what's available to you, and where you can go, what you can turn it into. It's events like Metamoris are doing. I see Metamoris as a new UFC. It's got that kind of underground feel. Only the hardcore really know about it, and let's keep that going.
Cool. One of the super fights we're going to see later this year is at ADCC. It's going to be Andre Galvao versus Cyborg. Who's your pick?
Galvao every time. Cyborg's amazing, but I just feel that Galvao, he's able to shift his game plan a little bit more fluidly than Cyborg's particular style. He's got a very specialized guard playing style, and he's fantastic. But Galvao's he's the greatest competitor of our generation.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, last question before we go to the mats. And that's, can you give a little bit of advice to the jiu-jitsu students out there who might be in a plateau?
It's common and not unexpected to hit a plateau in jiu-jitsu. Particularly, there's like this blue belt blues where you get your blue belt. I mean, you have that initial goal to work for, but blue is a very thick belt before you really start putting things together at purple and into combinations. I would say you don't know where you're going to get that inspiration or that technical influence from your game. So don't be afraid to sample from a wide variety of sources. Find out what resonates with you and just keep an open mind. Private lessons are never a bad idea. You know, somebody with more experience can shave you a few steps along your own progression because they've been there, they've done it, they know what will work for you. It's not just any technique to any technique in jiu-jitsu. It's about your particular body type, the game that tends to go along with that body type, and then learning the neighbors of the techniques that are well suited for your particular physiology. So I say keep an open mind, have a lot of technical influences. Don't just read one book. Don't just watch one video. And enjoy yourself along the way. Get lost in the journey. If you focus too much on your black belt, you'll never make it. You'll burn out. Enjoy every step, the step you just took and the one you're about to take.
Awesome advice from Roy Dean. Roy, if people want to find you online, where can they find you?
RoyDeanAcademy.com, and feel free to drop me a line. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel as well, and I really appreciate the opportunity, Jake.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the mats.
Okay. Of course, I want to smash my opponent. I'm going to try to do a little shoulder of justice here and flatten him out so he can't begin to get that underhook. They expect me to be able to hit the technique here going into the straight arm lock, but that's not where you want to do it. You want to add just a little bit.